constantly we get support tickets and we get questions on Facebook on, my IV is not testing correctly, it's off, or how do I do the calibration? So I figured, we create a 5-10 minute video on how to do it properly.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of CVTV Workshops. My name is Carlos. I'm here with Dave, owner of CoralVue, and we have 5 tips in here that will be very useful when you're trying to calibrate your dosing pumps. So the first one is you can use a calibrated beaker or use a scale.
Yeah.
Either one. So if you have a calibrated beaker, in our experience, we've actually, the plastic ones are not as accurate as the glass ones sometimes, so that makes it a problem. Also, when you're calibrating with a beaker, make sure that you use a beaker that is properly sized for the volume that you're calibrating. So if you're calibrating 100 milliliters, then get a beaker that is around 100 milliliters, 250 is fine. But if you're calibrating a 3 milliliters, like if you're calibrating the reagent that is only 3 milliliters, don't use a 100 milliliter beaker because it's going to be hard to do. So on that one, use like a 5 milliliter or a 10 milliliter beaker. But if you don't have beakers or you don't want to bother with the beakers, then you can use a scale. And you can buy those scales online. And all you do is you just, place the glass beaker, whatever you have on the scale, tear it so it's 0, and then calibrate the liquid. And then you just measure the grams. And it's not perfect, but it's perfect enough if you keep using the same scale, where 1 milliliter of reagent or 1 milliliter of salt water is equal to 1 gram.
In my opinion, I've found that weighing the reagent actually gives more accuracy, just because, some, depending on beakers or whatever type of measurement device you have, it not always equal to what you're weighing.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what's the second tip, Dave?
Yeah. So always upload changes after entering the calibration volume to ensure the calibration occurs.
Always make sure you hit the calibrate button. You wait until you get the 3 milliliters or 100 milliliters, and it tells you, you read it, you type it into the app, click accept, and then upload the changes. That's the key. And after that, now you can go back to the doser and do a manual dose to verify that when I type 50 milliliters, I actually get 50 milliliters on the beaker. But that brings us to the next subject, which is when verifying the amount, the volume, don't use the calibrate button again, because the calibrate button will run the pump at its raw speed. Yeah. That's the factory speed. You have to use a manual dose. Don't use the calibration button. Go to the manual dose, type in the flow rate per minute, whether it's 3 minutes, 3 per milliliters, or whether it's 50 or whether it's 100. Type that in and then dose it. What we'll do is that then the HYDROS will run the device for exactly 1 minute, and then you read the beaker or the scale and confirm that you got 3 milliliters, you got 50, you got 100. If you didn't, then run the calibration again.
This is a big one, Carlos. Check your lines for air bubbles.
Oh, God, yes.
If there's air in your reagent line, the test is not going to be accurate. I mean, imagine anywhere in the line, if there's air, we're measuring on a drip rate that's coming off of the pump. It just will throw off the entire test. You have to really watch your lines. Look at it from where you're drawing the reagent all the way through.
And if you see air bubbles with it, just grab your finger and just flicker it. As it's running, just flick it, and then you'll see the air bubble will start to move around. And like I said, Dave said, you cannot have air bubbles because the air bubbles will displace the liquid. So then when the motor is running, the motor assumes that it's running for 1 minute and it's 100% liquid. Therefore, you get 3 milliliters. But what if 10% of the line is full of air? So then air goes into the beaker. Then you're not getting 3 milliliters there. So your results are going to be off.
And you got to think about the device that you're pulling reagent from. Where could it be drawing air? Maybe a connection point, a bar, a John Guest fitting. somewhere it's drawing air.
One thing that I want to make sure that people know is that dosing pumps they're not regular pumps.
Hmm.
So if you put the dosing pumps, up high, 6-7 feet up, and then you
Yeah.
put the reagent reservoir all the way in the floor, the pump is going to have a hard time pulling that up. So
It's just got to
you
pull
may
it
get some.
back.
Yeah,
Is
it's
what
like pulling a vacuum, or if the dosing pump is on the floor and you're pushing all the way up to 6-7 feet, then all that head pressure comes down. Pumps are meant to move water, but they're not really there to deal with vacuum pulling or pressure from the head pressure. So make sure that your slack is as short as possible, so that the less pressure, the less times you're going to have to calibrate the pumps. Make sure that the barb is the proper size, because just because the line fits in the barb doesn't mean that it creates a vacuum seal. It looks like it fits fine, but it's still a little loose. So you may need to get a bigger barb, so then the hose is tighter. And the one thing that we give you with the HYDROS that we really like is we have those silicone lines, which are able to stretch. So you are able to grab that silicone line and fit it into a barb that is a little bit bigger than the line, because it will stretch. But when it stretches, it creates that seal, so you don't have to worry about air bubbles. And the last point, or the last tip in here, is the rubber lines in the dosing. The dosing heads. When you first get them, they're pretty stiff. They're hard. Especially during the winter time, they could be really hard and all that. So if you run that pump at that point where the lines are stiff, your calibration is going to be one way. Once the pump has ran, the heads are running for a while, then that line, because it's a rubber line, it'll eventually kind of give and settle into a nice malleable line that is soft. So once you do that, the calibration that you did when the lines are hard is completely different than when the lines are soft. So I recommend that you calibrate the dosing pumps again a few days later, after the unit has done several tests, to make sure. So now the lines are kind of nice and malleable. Yeah. So if you have any questions about dosing pumps or calibration of the dosing pumps, please head on over to support.coralvue.com, or you can visit us on Facebook at CoralVue HYDROS Group. And there's plenty of people there that are willing to help. Thank you for watching from Carlos and Dave, and we'll see you later.